Well, the legend that is the Snyder Cut was finally released after being teased and speculated upon for years. This massive 4-hour spectacle seemed like such a big deal, I wanted to do a bit of a bigger review for it than my usual micro reviews. So with that said, I will give a quick spoiler-free review at the beginning before going into more depth. This film had one thing it needed to do, which is be better than the theatrically released version. And at the very least, it does that. It does a much better job of following up on the previous films in the franchise by matching their tones a lot more closely. The characters are also a lot more fully realized by giving them more attachment to the main plot in their backgrounds and importance to the climax of the film. They also composed a new score for the film, and while some song choices don't quite fit, overall it seems better. On the downside, this film is 4 hours long and in no way needs to be. There's a lot of scenes that could be cut from the film and nothing would be lost, especially anything that is there just to set up a sequel that will never happen. One other minor thing is that while they toned down the humor from the theatrical release, there are still some jokes that for me didn't land. Overall, I give the film a rating of 6.5 out of 10. To start the full review, I'd like to go over a few different categories and talk about whether I like what they did and how it compares to the theatrical release. We'll look at visuals, music, structure, and characters. Visuals. So for the visuals, first and foremost, the obvious thing to mention is that it is shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which makes the film appear older. It bothered me a little early in the movie, but I got used to it and even forgot it was any different before long. The entire palette of the film is a little dull and gray, but certain colors do pop, just not as much as the theatrical version, which I would say is almost too far in the other direction. I think the duller colors do help to hide some of the imperfections in the visual effects, which for the most part look amazing. The main villain is entirely CG, computer generated, and they changed his design from the theatrical version, and I have to say it looks way better. Cyborg is a mix of CG and real, and while he mostly looks good, there were times where his design was noticeable. The action was also shot with a lot more weight than in the original, which is a carryover from the previous films that I really enjoy. Though sometimes the visual effects don't always follow realistic physics, which can become distracting. Zack Snyder likes to use slow motion to add more weight to his action, and he didn't shy away from it here, using it probably too much. Despite all my complaints, I do think it's a better film visually than the original release, and it all has Zack Snyder's trademark style to it, which if you like that, you'll get it in abundance here. Music. They recorded an entirely new score for this film, and while I thought Danny Elfman did a decent job, especially playing on nostalgia, I think Tom Holkenborg does a much better job. For the most part, the music hits really well with the scenes and helps add to the emotions. I have two complaints about the new score, however, one bigger and one smaller. The small complaint is that I liked the song Icky Thump for Aquaman's dock walk. For me, it worked with his character, was just fun for the scene. The new version used a slower, folkier song, which instead of making him seem more brooding or edgier, to me it made him look even cheesier. The other big complaint is an over-reliance on Wonder Woman's theme. I think it's a great song, but they use it a little too much throughout the film. Structure. This film is 4 hours long, so to keep an audience engaged it has to be structured well. They broke the film into a prologue, 6 parts, and an epilogue, so it can be viewed in pieces more like a television series. I didn't watch it that way, so my experience is based on viewing it all as one film. With that said, even broken apart, I think there would be scenes that feel superfluous. The first half of the film is where the biggest changes are, adding a lot of backstory to both the heroes and the villains. It's a bit of a slog early on with a lot of the information being given to the audience through exposition, but they accompany a lot of that though not all, with nice visuals of flashbacks. Once all the early setup is done, the film really picks up in the middle and seemed to fly by. The climax is a tremendous fight, which does a much better job than the original. In the original, most of the characters were sidelined, and it became obvious that the fight could be won by just Superman alone. This version makes every character play an important role in the final fight, justifying it being a Justice League film. The ending goes on a little too long and adds some confusing scenes that are just there for either fan service or to set up a sequel that will likely never happen. Characters. For this category, I want to go through each major character and say what I liked about their part in the film. Superman. Starting with my favorite character, just for the fact that he doesn't have the weird CG lip that he had in the original, he is better. Overall, however, I do have some mixed feelings about his actual character in this version. In the original, I think by the end, they actually managed to get a lot closer to the Superman I know and love. He's optimistic, lighthearted, and a free soul. This version does a better job with his revival scene, and with him being confused and defensive when first awoken, but once he came back to his senses, I thought he was made darker and edgier, just for the sake of being darker and edgier. They even put him in the black Superman outfit, which was teased as being a more sinister version of him, but I guess they just did that since Zack Snyder thought it looked cooler. In the end, I do like the heavy effect Death and Rebirth had on him. I just wish he ended up somewhere closer to the classic Superman. Batman. In the original, Batman was made into almost a joke character, with quips similar to a Marvel character all throughout. It didn't seem to fit his character too well, and in this film he is a lot more serious and in character. He also keeps up with the other superpowered heroes a lot more and gets moments to shine in action sequences. One downgrade I do feel he had was that in the original he was trying to live up to the symbol that Superman was, which I found to be pretty interesting. But with Superman's role as a symbol being mostly ignored, that part of Batman's character was also mostly ignored. I did like the weight they put on his guilt for his involvement in Superman's death, and that pushing him to needing Superman's revival. One of Batman's traits is that he's a great detective, but in this film, Alfred, played brilliantly by Jeremy Irons, does more of the detective work for him, which feels like a miss for Batman, but I like that it gives Alfred more involvement. Overall, I think Batman had a bit of an improvement here. Wonder Woman. It's no secret that Wonder Woman has been the most successful character of the DCEU, so there wasn't too much to improve, but they still managed to. In the original, there was a lot of scenes where she was used as eye candy or over-sexualized, and that's mostly gone here. The action scenes with her also have a lot more weight. She feels much more deadly in this film. They also added more scenes that directly link her to the villain's story. She is the one who figures out most of what is going on with the invasion of Earth. Overall, she was already one of the better characters in the original, and she just got even better. The Flash. The Flash was almost entirely the comic relief in the original, and while he is still that, they toned it down a lot. They also gave him a lot more of an introduction and background, which was needed. I only wish it had come in his own movie before this. All of his introduction and background does not relate to the main plot, and this can make them feel a little bit like a distraction. I do like that he plays a much bigger role in the film's climax. Instead of just being off doing something mostly unrelated, he is directly needed in order to stop Steppenwolf's plans. In doing this, they were able to show a little more of the Flash's powers. In this version of the movie, he was already a little more experienced with using his powers and being a hero, rather than before when he had never really done anything like that. Aquaman. In the original, Aquaman, like the Flash, was mostly comic relief. They toned that down quite a bit, but he mostly stays the same. They add a couple of scenes of him talking to Vulko, which gives him a little more depth, but those who haven't seen Aquaman may be a little confused as to who he is, other than being Willem Dafoe. Overall, he didn't change too much. If anything, I would argue he's the character with the least improvement, or is maybe even worse. Cyborg. Cyborg is the most improved player for this film. He is the heart of the film, being the most directly tied to the events, and getting the most character development, most of which was not in the original. They did a much better job of explaining his origins and his abilities, and they made those directly tied to the villain's objectives. His father also plays a bigger role, being very involved in understanding and fighting the alien technology. My only complaint about him is that they no longer had him say his catchphrase, "Booyah." Steppenwolf. The main villain of the film in the original was completely uninteresting, not intimidating, and looked awful. While I still wouldn't say he is interesting, they did manage to justify it a little by making him just a lackey of Darkseid's. So while he is the main antagonist, he isn't the real threat or villain. They also made him look way cooler, and with that much more intimidating. And not just his design, his fight scenes were also much better. And while he still isn't much of a character, he did get a bit more development than in the original, being obsessed with redeeming himself in the eyes of Darkseid. Final thoughts. This film is a massive undertaking, and it really shows the importance of a director's vision. Zack Snyder getting this made and it proving to be better than what we got may convince studios to give up more control to directors. We could also end up seeing more films with this structure of being watchable as an entire film or episodic. So with this review, 3 questions need answered. 1. Is it better than the original release? Yes, a resounding yes, in almost every way. 2. Is it a good movie? I'm not sure. Far from amazing, but not terrible either. Some people who were pushing heavily for this to be released for years and hyping it up might call it a masterpiece, but don't fall down that hole. There's a reason the studio didn't want to release this version and cut so much of it out. I just think that this was better than what we originally got. There's still a lot of things I found wrong with the film, but I kind of just liked it anyways. I enjoyed seeing this take on the characters and the world. The best version of this film is probably somewhere in between the two. 3. Is it worth the 4-hour time sink? Probably not. Unless you already like Zack Snyder's directing, then yes. And probably more so if you break it up over a couple of intermissions. Also, if you liked Man of Steel and or Batman v Superman, then you should watch it. Those are all my thoughts on this film. Like I said in the spoiler-free review, I give it a 6.5 out of 10, so it's okay, but far from spectacular. This is the end card, which means you've made it to the end of the video, so thank you for watching. If you liked the video, hit like. If you want to see more, maybe hit subscribe.